Welcome everyone who is present here today on this marvelous Sunday afternoon or evening for wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Today we have a beautiful presentation going deep into the probings of the Levitical sacrifices and offerings and thinking about them with fresh new lens. We've had a 6-month journey with Rabbi Ysoscher Katz and Tobi Kahn, exploring these ideas in great depth. Rabbi Katz is the chair of the Talmud department at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. He led for 8 years a Daf Yomi Shir in Borough Park. He's an esteemed educator from SAR and former pulpit rabbi at the shul in Brooklyn. Prospect Heights Synagogue, and Tobi Kahn is an esteemed world-class artist with exhibitions around the world, exploring themes that probe the mind of art, nature, color, perspective in just phenomenal ways. He has an exhibition currently at the Phillips Collection that spans his career. And without further ado, please share with us your deep insights.
Okay, I'm watching my clock. It's now 6 after, so I have 20 minutes. I'm going to use it. I first want to say I'm so moved by seeing so many people that I know on screen. My Rebbe, Rabbi Saul Berman, is here, and to me, that's I don't even know what else to say. But every person I see here means so much to me. And what fascinates me about the Parsha is that we read it every week. And I'm so interested as a child. I'll give you a quick background, and there's my sister in Yerushalayim. I'm so touched that every child, I would, every week I'd go to shul. I grew up in Breuer's in Washington Heights. My grandfather was very close to Rav Breuer, and he sat right opposite him. And my father was very strict about shul, and I wasn't allowed to talk at all. It's not one of the things that I'm so good at. But my grandfather said, as long as I davened, basics, brachas, brach shema, ashrei yishtabach shema, and shemon esrei, he wouldn't talk to me, but he would nod his head. And right opposite Rabbi Breuer, I gave my grandfather a lot of credit. I could talk and he would answer me. I would sit in shul and read the Parsha. And one of the Parshas that I love, the Parshas that talked about the aesthetics in the Torah. This past week's Parsha talked about building of the Mishkan. And I did something called Poles for the Dwelling. And when I went from Breuer's to MTA to acting at Tel Aviv U, then Karen B'Yavne, and then Gush Etzion. And I went to art school at Hunter and Pratt, and my senior show at Hunter was something called Poles for the Dwelling. And I recreated what the outside area would have looked like. And I also built a Mizbeach, and that's what paid for graduate school. So, when people say, how did you deal with growing up from and being an artist? It never was an issue for me. Relearning this Parsha again, I started thinking about what karbonos are. And as a child, I'm a Kohen, as is Ysoscher. I minded, one day I was walking with my mom and I said, I'm so upset. People keep saying my grandfather, in fact, my mother's father used to say to me, when the Beit HaMikdash comes back, he'd love to give me the masa that I would get because I'm a Kohen. And I thought to myself, I'm going to have to kill animals. I really don't like killing animals. And I was very upset. And my mother said to me, talk to Dad. So I went to Dad and I said, Dad, this is something I'm really not happy about. And he goes, you love incense. First of all, you know how many families, Kahanic families there are? Don't worry, you're not going to have to sacrifice anything. So many years later, I'm thinking about this parsha and I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I think about what it felt like for the animals that did nothing wrong, or for the plants that were cut and destroyed? I want to do my studying this for this time with Ysoscher. I told him what I felt. I want to do it from what the animals felt like and what the plants felt like. And they did nothing wrong. We as human beings were given different types of offerings to give, and we were given those because either we did something wrong, or bishkaga, or bezmezed, or whatever it was. I wanted to think about it from another point of view. So now I'd like to show you these images, and we'll go through the images quickly, and then you can ask questions later. But so let's go with the first images. So this was, so all the images, by the way, many of the paintings in the show will be in the show that opens up on Long Island in a regular museum, not a Jewish museum. I've been thinking a lot about plant formations, and it's also this year is Shemitah, and I've been thinking about how we have to care about the land and everything. So I am an abstract painter. The images are all based on photographs that I've taken, and then I transfer them into something that's more abstract. So I was thinking about what plants look like as if they were flying to heaven, and what, again, I was telling Ysoscher that my family comes from the Lavush, and my sister and I always talk about, whenever I think of anything mystical, I think it comes from my mother's side of the family. So I was thinking about, the mystical feeling of a plant taking on our sins or helping us create something for God. And what does that feel like? And what does it mean? So I showed this image to some of my friends, and they said, oh, you obviously like Matisse. And I said, I do obviously like Matisse. And yes, I understand that I'm playing with cutout shapes, but it really is thinking about how these plant shapes would be singing on their way up to heaven. Let's go to the next one. So then I started thinking about, what does it feel like for an animal knowing that they are taking the place? And again, I'm not a fool. I do realize that animals are not thinking about what they're doing, but I wanted to give them some extra strength and power. And I kept thinking about Cycladic art. Art of the Cyclades is a huge influence on me. They're the islands off of Greece, and these works were done at the same time as we became a Jewish people over 5,000 years ago. And I started thinking about, how do I show you a plant, an animal shape without being so literal? And I wanted it to be as if it's, if you read the Parsha, which I hope you all do, you realize that they cut off the flesh and they left the bones, and then they would take the blood and put the blood on the Mizbeach, and they kept dividing up all the parts of the animal. And I wanted to go to the essence of the animal and see that shape, and you'll see some of the other shapes more realistic. But this is really as the plant is going up to as the animal is going up to heaven. Let's go to the next one. So then I was telling Ysoscher that I just made this recent one, and I thought to myself, plants don't have blood, but plants, I'm sure you all know this, and if you don't know, the flowering parts of plants are there to attract the bees because the bees then have to pollinate and make things continue to grow. And I was thinking to myself, I wanted to give honor to these beautiful flowers, but I also thought about the pain that they have, that they die. But then I thought to myself, at least in their death, they're doing something to help continue the planet. And so this piece to me was these red flowering shapes were also there, knowing that when we kill these plants for carbonate, we have to think about what we're doing. Let's go to the next one. Then I was thinking about the fact that the Kohen had to actually kill these animals. And I looked at ancient tools that were done for cutting the field, and very sharp tools that were there to cut an animal without giving it much pain in their death. And you kill the you kill an animal as quickly as you can. You do the shechita so that it causes as little pain as it can to the animal. And I wanted to make something that also looked beautiful and lyrical, but also did the job. And I've always thought about the fact that there's something called Bein Hashmashot in Twilight, and all these tools that were made during that time for different religious practices. And I thought it was very important that the tool that was there, that was either cutting down the plants or killing the animals, should be graceful in itself, and it shouldn't look like a violent tool, but it should have grace and beauty, because we're doing it for something better than just killing. Let's go to the next one. And then I really started thinking, all this work, some of this work was started many years ago, and somebody once said to me, how long does it take you to make a piece of art? And I said, well, the longest piece of art of anything I've ever made is my bar mitzvah drasha was between Pesach and Shavuos. My drasha in Breuers was, my bar mitzvah Shabbos is Emor, and I didn't want to talk about that parsha. And I came up with the idea of talking about whether you make a bracha and counting the Omer as a katan, and then you become a gadol, and there are 49 different blessings, and do you say it with a bracha or not? And I thought to myself, wow, I love that idea. And when I was in my 40s, I wake up in the middle of the night and I wake my dear wife, I have a little piece of wood, and I said, I just figured out I'm going to make an Omer counter. So it took me from the age of 13 to 48 to actually make my first Omer counter. So it took me quite a while. And some of these images I've been thinking about for a while. And in fact, 7 years ago, the last time I thought about Shemitah, I started thinking about how do we relate to fruits of a plant? And when we think about when we have a sacrifice of wheat, and if we have different herbs or different spices, is there a way to take off things without killing the plant? And I started thinking about, there are certain plants that you can take parts off and it doesn't kill the plant. Now, somebody just asked me about the names of the titles. You have to ask my wife, Nessa Rappaport. I don't like untitled. I tell Nessa what the idea behind the image is, and I'm interested in you, the viewer, for being part of the experience. I've always believed that making a piece of art is not only for the artist, and every artist I respect, and I have many, many artists who I admire. In fact, my students at SVA always say to me, I say, these are my top 10 favorite artists. And then at the end of the semester, they say to me, you have like 250 10 favorite artists. And that is true. But I love all of them in my 10 top favorite. But I don't want to call something untitled. I admire Richard Diebenkorn, who called everything the Ocean Park series. I don't want to do that. So Nessa helps me make up the name. Very often they're based on Hebrew. And then all the paintings on paper are studies for larger paintings. So if any of you come to my show on nature in November, these are the studies and the paintings will be there. So these are all made on handmade paper. So it comes a photograph, drawing, painting on handmade paper, and then eventually painting like you see behind me on the wall, or sometimes 6 feet or 10 foot or 12-foot paintings. I always work small first because that's how I work out the idea. Let's go to the next one. So these for me are very emotional, and I think these are Ysoscher's favorites. I'm one of those guys who, and he's shaking his head. I'm one of those Jewish guys that when somebody gives you 2 ties and you put on the other one, you go, what's wrong with the other one? So I know that some people relate to my sculptures more than my paintings. I'm happy if you like anything I do. So these were the most literal. These were the ones when I thought about what these animals felt like, either their whole body and I kept thinking about that you cut off the fat and you cut off the meat and you cut off, and what is left, I really believe you have to give kavod to everything. And there's a beautiful saying, and I'm a Kohen, so I could never do this. My grandfather was very involved with a Chevra Kadisha. And I always think about when somebody, Admei Esrim, dies, their body is left, and that was the keli that God gave all this greatness to, and then that keli, that the body is gone, and that's what's buried. But you're supposed to give kavod, and you wash it in a certain way, and you do everything. And I thought these are sculptures that I made of the bones of either heads or birds. I mean, they're all different animals that are sacrificed. And I thought of that back image. I didn't want it to be like a bull or a ram or a sheep. I really wanted the essence of animal. I wanted it to be the essence of animal, and I wanted the front ones to be the essence of skeleton. But I painted it in gold because in my belief in Judaism, tchelet is the Jewish color. I teach color theory, and I always say to my students who are observant or know anything about Judaism, I can't separate Joseph Alber's color theory from learning about what tchelet and argaman is. And I also think about all the kalim in the made out of different things. And I think gold is about kedusha. And I think of the kruvim in the Kodesh HaKodashim and what they face each other or what they were, but they were gold. And that's very important. So these 3 pieces, I didn't want them as one piece alone because I look at it as a respect thing. It's not only about their body. It's not only about their skeleton. And eventually I'd love to do these full scale. These are very small. And as I told you, I always start small. My fantasy is these pieces would be 10 and 12 foot large. And yes, I have done many outdoor sculptures that are 10 and 20 feet tall. Let's go to the next one. And then I thought about the idea of hiding. You think about these bare trees and these bare plants. And I think to myself, again, I'm not so mystical, but I do think what it must feel like when you know that part of what you are is going to be sacrificed. And I wanted to do something about the emptiness or the beauty of, like I showed you with the animals with no skin and no things. I wanted you to see the plants and the trees and the shrubs. And I didn't do anything with exact wheat, but all the things that are then left barren after they've done what they've done to help make Kedusha, but then please God, they're replenished. Let's go to the last one, I think, or that is the last. No, there is another one. This again, to me, is about this sadness and longing for, I don't even want to talk about that because this is very painful for me when I think about what is left when everything is gone. I think that is the last. Was that the last one? Oh no, I think so. This one is Reach Nichoach Lashem. The idea of what's going up to God, and I love that it's the space between the space, and you see the clouds of smoke going up. And I believe that if you really ask for forgiveness, and your forgiveness is forgiven, it's the right type of smoke and the right type of fire. And this to me is about what happens when you ask for forgiveness and you're given forgiveness. So Ysoscher, I think that's my time is up. And I just finished in time. So I kept to my word.
Perfect.
So Ysoscher, I have to say, first of all, I want to say to Devere, because his father's on this screen. Devere, you're one of the finest, such a edel neshama. Hashem should give you a lot of chizuk to continue what you're doing. I really thank you for introducing me. I know Ysoscher for over 30 years, and I want to do a shout out to his mother-in-law, who was very good to me as a young artist in Riverdale. I don't know if Meryl Euclides is on, but she said she would be on. Meryl hired me as a very young artist, and I really care about people that are kind to young people. And Ysoscher's mother-in-law loved art, and I even think she gave me a job, but whether she did or she didn't, I don't care. She talked to me as a full-fledged person when I was a teenager. She was a brilliant woman, and I want to thank her. And it's your wife's the chus. I'm thrilled that I've learned with you. I've learned so much from you in these 6 months. So it's your turn.
Thank you, Tobi, very much. I appreciate it. I'll actually start off where Tobi finished, which is, as the rabbis teach us, the first thing you do is you honor the hosts. I'm just going to echo what Tobi said. I cannot thank enough the Veer for this amazing project that he's put together. I mean, we're just one of a large group of artists and educators who have teamed up to think through the Parshiyot. And given that I'm also the Veer's teacher during the day, I know a little bit of behind the scenes what's goes on. So the amount of work that the Veer puts into this is just incredible. And since the Veer has been my student 1.5 years, I fortunately got to know the family, Rabbi Kahana, Karen, and the siblings. And this is just in the blood. This is a family that appreciates aesthetics, that appreciates art, that is just wide and broad and incredible. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be here. To you. I am a teacher, so a teacher does sources. So I'm going to share with you a little source sheet and share with you my reflections of the last couple of months having worked with Tobi. We say every night at the Ma'arif prayer, we say, which basically means God in his deep sophistication manipulates time and maneuvers time so as things should happen a particular way. And I'm a deep believer in that. I deeply believe that things happen at a particular time for a particular reason. And when the Veer broke this idea with me, when he broached this idea with me and he said, oh, I'll team you up with an artist and you'll learn together and you produce art and it's going to be coordinated with a parsha. And I said, okay, fine. I mean, I like a lot of parshiyot well, so it'll be fun. And then finally, the Veer told me 2 things. A, you're going to work with Tobi Kahn. And I said, oh my gosh, this is incredible. This is an artist that I've known for many years, not up close. I mean, we daven in the same shul, but about 25 rows apart. And I knew Tobi's work, and this will be an opportunity to learn together with Tobi. So that was simcha number 1. And then the real simcha was when the Veer told me, and you guys will be working on Parshas Vayikra. It's like, wow, that's really one of my favorite parshiyot. And I know for most of my contemporaries, this is one of the worst parshiyot. But for me, this is one of the most amazing parshiyot. And I'll take my 12 minutes to explain to you why, but I want to contextualize it in my general attitude towards art. I mentioned to Tobi and to Dvir, and many of my friends know this, that if I come back another time, I definitely am going to study the history of art. I feel that art has so much to teach us and so much to help us be better people and better Jews. I'm going to run through, I have a lot of sources. I'm just not going to cover all of them, but there's a beautiful source from the Baal Shem Tov. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share with you the sources after the presentation. The Baal Shem Tov talks even about how when someone sees a pretty person, whether it's a pretty woman or a pretty man, you would think that the Baal Shem Tov as a Hasidic Rebbe would say, oh, look away because no, it might cause you to have inappropriate thoughts. And he says, no. Beauty has something transcendent. every piece of beauty, every piece of art, there is something transcendent. And if someone knows how to appreciate art, when they see a pretty person, instead of looking away and thinking, oh, they should sort of notice the divinity in every person. And similarly, Rav Kook, and I promised Tobi that I'm not going to talk about Rembrandt, but I have to just, as a sideway, Rav Kook famously went to the museum in London, and he saw a Rembrandt, and he said something incredibly audacious. He said that there's a midrash that talks about the light that was created on the first day, that it was so bright and so overwhelming that God hid it for later time, for when Mashiach comes, and he's going to distribute it for tzaddikim. And Rav Kook said, sometimes artists are able to dip into this celestial light and really present it to humans as an appreciation. So basically, Rav Kook argued that Rembrandt is one of those tzaddikim who can dip in to the Or HaGanuz and illustrate that and bring it to life. So this is kind of really one of two sources of many sources. And my life's work has been to kind of try to illustrate and show people how much art can really enhance our understanding. So I'm going to kind of zoom out in general about art, and then eventually zoom in to Tobi's work in particular. So I believe deeply that art can serve as commentary. It can add a layer to the Bible that we don't have absent art appreciation. Even though there are hundreds and hundreds of commentators on the Bible, there is another dimension of commentary, which is art, that can really add another layer. And the same thing is with the Siddur, with our prayer book. I feel that if we would complement what we pray and how we pray with work of art, then we would have a very different experience. And I'm just going to walk you through a couple of artists and then get to Tobi's work. I know many of you will not agree with me, but I am a big fan of the book of Job. In fact, this is probably the only book in the Tanakh that I know well. For those of you who know my background, I grew up in the Haredi yeshiva. We don't study Nach, but I do study the book of Job. And one of the difficulties about the book of Job is that we get to the end and it's kind of confusing. God talks to Job in 3 chapters, and it's not clear what God is telling Job. And for me, the artist that best illustrates what God tells Job is Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock in this piece shows us that if we look close enough and if we're open to it, we could appreciate the beauty of chaos. Right? This is the most chaotic painting you'll ever see. There's random colors and random stripes. And yet, if someone appreciates Jackson's work, you should kind of in awe of the beauty of the chaos. And I believe that that's the book of Job. The book of Job is really God teaching Job that, you know what? Life is complicated. Life is chaotic. You need to see the aesthetics and the beauty of that chaos. So for me, when I teach Job, and I teach the book of Job a lot, the culmination of the class is the Jackson Pollock, because that teaches us really what the message of the book of Job is. When we learn the story of the Akedah, right? We learn the story of the binding of Isaac. I'm sorry, this is my second Rembrandt, but I promise I'm going to go. But I only am using it by comparison. Look at how Caravaggio on the left side of the screen and Rembrandt on the right side of the screen illustrates the story of the Akedah. If we had time, I can spend maybe an hour explaining how these are 2 very different takes. Caravaggio's Abraham is different than Rembrandt's Abraham. Caravaggio's Isaac is different than Rembrandt's Isaac. The angel is different. The lighting is different. There's just so much deep commentary going on in these pictures that would help us understand the Torah in a way that we wouldn't otherwise. This Matisse, right? A beautiful Matisse. You know what this Matisse illustrates for me? Creation of Adam and Eve. Right? Adam and Eve in the beginning were one person, and then God splits them into 2. To me, you look at this Matisse, and there you have 2 people lumped into one, and God kind of separates them into 2. Okay, so that's kind of in terms of Pashanut. I also think that the other thing that we can do with art quickly is, you look at a Siddur, our prayer books are so thick. And why are they so thick? Because every generation thinks, okay, this has become so rote, so boring, so predictable. We need to add something. And each time there's another prayer and another prayer and another tefillah. I would suggest, and if I had the money, if anybody knows of funders, I would suggest to publish a Siddur with artwork on the side. And in fact, one year I did a project where every day of the 7 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I shared on my Facebook wall a different piece of art that evokes the mood of repentance. And these are various artists. I'm going to quickly walk you through them. I think Monk's beautiful scream is evoking Shema Kolenu, right? You scream out, please listen to our voice, we're so desperate. Dali's Clocks talks about the dissipation of time. So much time has gone by, so much time has lost. I'll skip through a few of them. I think Frida Kahlo's beautiful evocative painting, for me, reminds me of Kol Atzmotai Tomarna Hashem Bichamocha. Our bones speak to God. She, as we know, had a tragic accident which broke her spine, and that kind of infused a lot of her art. I would love a Siddur that on one side of the Nishmat prayer has this painting of Frida Kahlo. It brings out something that otherwise we don't have, and so on and so forth. Lucian Freud. I also believe that the Book of Mormon, I know it's a provocative play. I know it has a lot of, inappropriate words, but I would happy to explain to you. If you read my Dvar Torah on this thing, I'm explaining why I think the Book of Mormon is actually a deeply religious play in a deeply sophisticated way. And that brings me to Tobi's work. Tobi is right. These two are the ones who spoke to me most, but that doesn't mean that the others didn't, but these two spoke to me most. And let me briefly explain to you why. We all know that going back to Maimonides already, the korbanot was difficult. What's the point of killing animals, and how is that a means of serving God? In fact, Maimonides goes so far as to say, it was just temporary. It was a temporary concession. Of course, once the Jews are going to mature enough, we're going to eliminate the sacrifices. Nachmanides takes him on, of course, and he's horrified by this, and he kind of can't believe that he would say that korbanot are a temporary thing. Again, I would be happy to share the sources. I know I'm running through that. Here is my suggestion that has been confirmed by Tobi's work. I think we got the order of things wrong. We think that what we read in the Torah the last 4 weeks about building the temple, and you should build it this way, and it should be made this way. And of course, the Bible repeats itself, every detail and every nuance. And we all think, okay, now we have the temple. This week's Torah portion, the korbanot, are the climax. We build the temple so that we can have a place to bring the korbanot. I would suggest, and I would argue, that we got it wrong. That is the other way around. The goal of the temple is to bring us in the presence of art which takes people into a place of transcendence, takes us out of our routine, takes us out of our norms, takes us out of our daily usual schedule, and puts us in this kind of magnificent transcendent space. The korbanot, the sacrifices, are the means to get us into the temple. And once we get to the temple, we are there in the presence of divinity. And in fact, again, my time is running out. In fact, there are so many sources which argue that the primary responsibility of the person who brings the korban is to bring the korban and drop it off. Well, if they drop it off and they don't do anything else, what have they accomplished? They've accomplished that they've been there. They've accomplished that they've come there. And the beauty about Tobi's work is that Tobi allowed us to think of maybe when there is another temple, the new korbanot are going to be the kind of work that Tobi does, right? It will not be slaughtering animals, but it will instead be appreciating what is the aesthetic message that the korbanot convey. And I think because of that, particularly these two pieces, right? We all know that korbanot have 3 types. There's the animals, there's the birds, and there's the plants, right? Now, in this piece of Tobi's, on the right side, drawing the bloody color in the flowers makes us appreciate that the blood doesn't have to be actual blood that's shed. right? The image of blood and the kind of notion of blood and what that evokes can work even on plants. And all of a sudden, one understands that plants can do the same thing. Then the other part of Tobi's work, the one on the left, the reason it speaks to me, and again, art is by the eye of the beholder. To me, it seems that this one is a person, this one is an animal, and this one is a plant. And it makes us think of the relationship between the three. Perhaps that's the purpose of the korbanot. The purpose of the korbanot is to make us realize that there is a unity, right? There is a thread running through each and every one of these creatures, whether it's humans and animals and plants. And that means that the purpose of the temple still lives on with us, even though we have not had a temple anymore. In fact, I would say that what Tobi did with this beautiful work is he brought korbanot without an ounce of blood being shed. And that to me is the temple of the purpose of the temple. In fact, and with that I'll end, I would argue that art houses are the Mikdashei Ma'at of our time. Art houses are the mini Beit HaMikdash that we have today. We can go to the Beit HaMikdash, the temple is destroyed, but we can go to places that evoke, right? That push us in the same direction that the beautiful temple with all its art, with all its color, with all its design was supposed to invoke in us. So like I said, I think that there was a divine design for me to work with you, Tobi. Korbanot was something that I always thought hide beneath the surface what power the Torah and God attributes to artwork. Artwork is sacred, artwork is holy, because art brings us in the presence of holiness. Thank you.
Wow. I love that Matisse. I never thought of that Matisse that way. So I can tell you, I learned two new things. The other pieces were beautiful, and that seeing the Pollock that way, I love what's called automatic writing. You know, I teach a foundation class at SVA, and I love the way you interpreted that Pollock. I will never see that Pollock the same. I was like, whoa. And you know, it's so interesting to hear you speak. And by the way, I love Rembrandt, and I love Rembrandt's light, but I like more the way you compared the two of them than him alone. And I know that Rav Kook thing, and I'm so happy my sister's online, because I always loved Rav Kook. And my sister is a real Rav Kook fan. And when I had the great privilege of learning at Gush, I learned with Yoel Ben Nun, and I learned with him Rav Kook. And I think what Rav Kook said about art, I don't know, like what he did in Betzalel in the beginning, and I think that is so true. I also really appreciate from the bottom of my heart that I think there are many ways to do interpretations. And after being married to a writer like Nessa Rappaport, who every word is golden, and she'll say about our son, Josh, and myself, who are really purely visual thinkers, I do think, and I love what you said, because I think visual thinking is another way of being. You know, Nessa said that, you know, once we had a discussion early on in our marriage, and I was taking a long time to answer. And she said, what's going on? And I said, well, I have to go back in my mind to the experience, and I have to see the whole thing again before I can answer. And she said, that must be so exhausting. I said, well, doesn't everybody think that way? I didn't realize that I am not a verbal. I've learned how to speak, and being married for over 38 years, I know I've gotten better. And somebody's on here, Janet Dardick, who's been I've worked with, looking at art for over, I'd say close to 40 years. And she goes, you know, you've gotten much better. You finish your sentences and everything. And I say, yeah, well, I've been married to a writer for this many years, but I love what you said about art. And I think that is so important to reiterate that and my Rebbe is Rabbi Saul Berman. And one of the reasons I love him so much is you go into his home and you see all this art. And I have to say this about Rav Amital also. Every time Rav Amital came to New York, he came to my show at the Guggenheim. He also came in to marry us, but he'd come to my studio every year. And when I went into his house in Yerushalayim, my art books were near his farm. And I never felt belittled as a visual thinker. And I love what you said, Ysoscher. I just finished doing the Reform Movement's Haggadah, and they asked me to do images to relate to each piece. And it was very powerful for me that that people care that much to understand when you tell Yetzias Mitzrayim, or you anything you do. In fact, there's somebody else here that's online, which is so interesting. Richard McBee wrote one of my favorite pieces on my Sky and Water show at the Newberger Museum. The New York Times gave it a good review, a lot of good reviews, but he wrote something that I'll never forget. And I've said this about abstraction. He wrote that, like you say Shemona Esrei every day, you say it many times a day, and each time it's different because you're different. And I did a huge installation of 80 Sky and Water paintings, and it made me think about the work. I wasn't thinking about Shemona Esrei, to be honest. I was thinking about how diverse Sky and Water is. But there was something very powerful for me to understand that somebody who knows learning can look at abstract art and understand there's something very deep in there. And I think about people like Mark Rothko. I think is one of the greatest artists of all time. He happened to be a Jew. I think about Soutine, happened to be a Jew. I think it's no accident that his father was a shochet. You know, I think about so many artists who were Jewish and brought their knowledge of Judaism into the conversation of Hidur Mitzvah. And what does it mean to do that? I'm also very proud. Thank you for bringing up that my show is, I have 7 paintings up at the Phillips now, and the curator wrote about it. He's not Jewish, and talked about the fact that my work is about tikkun olam. I really believe in that. I believe every artist is put on this planet to do something. I believe, I know there are artists who are very political. I know there are artists who are very into telling a narrative that is very realistic. I want to put in something that makes the world more beautiful. And I want everyone to think about their soul and think about how do you get to a higher place. And if I like what you said about Carbonate Ysoscher, you're right. I love that idea much better. That's not the main deal. The main deal was to make this beautiful, holy place, and that everyone brings something to it. You're not allowed to bring too much money. It's about every person bringing what their knowledge is. There's somebody else here that got me to do my first Orthodox shul, and I can never thank him enough, because I really believe that artists have something to say in the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just quickly, just 2 responses to what you said. And then if there are people who want to ask questions, then I wanted to open up for questions. So number one, just to reinforce my thesis about the role of the sacrifices is just a means to bring people into the temple, is like you said, first of all, everybody can bring korbanot. And secondly, and I know I'm different than most people in this audience, I suspect, and in general, most people feel, oh my gosh, the details of the sacrifices and the intricacies. And I think actually, 2 things I'll say. First of all, I think the temple Jew was a very self-aware Jew. They had to know what mode are they? Are they a korban chatat mode, which is different than an ashram, which is different than olah? Or even when they brought korbanot of a good mood, there's different kinds of shlamims and todas and all kinds of sacrifices, which are the nuances of our mental state. So I think actually a temple Jew had a much more conscientious religious life that we have. They had to know the intricacies. But I also think the reason why there's so many korbanot is to compel almost everybody to end up in that place and to appreciate the glory and the beauty of the aesthetic. But I want to just add, in terms of what you talked about seeing, and you tell Nessa you have to go back and you have to visualize it. So I don't share your aversion to Kabbalah, Tobi, as you know. I actually like Kabbalah a lot. In fact, I teach a class of Talmud at the yeshiva, but I also teach a very exciting class on Zohar. And for those who've studied Zohar, know that the most obvious distinction between the Talmud and the Zohar is Anybody want to put in the chat quickly? Do you know what is the phrase that comes up very often in the Talmud, but also comes up very often in the Zohar with a significant distinction? If anybody wants to put it in the chat.
God, you're such a born teacher. I
Oh,
love
of course.
it.
What do you mean? You're just going to yap and yap and yap?
I'm too
Thank
shy
you.
to do this in such an
No,
esteemed
no, love it. I don't know who JSC Muscat Brown, but JSC Muscat Brown is absolutely right. The Bible is an auditory text. Tashema, 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 tashema. Here, 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 here. The Zohar is a visual text because that very same introduction is switched from tashema to tachazi, come see. And those are two very different first principle distinctions between how the religious experience happens. Is it a Shema Yisrael experience, or is it a Item Oto experience, right? And those are the bookends of Shema, right? Shema starts with auditory and ends with a visual because Shema encompasses the entire spectrum of who we are. And I tell my students all the time, the best way to understand the text is to imagine it in your brain, right? To imagine it in your head. All of a sudden you notice things that you've not appreciated before. So I couldn't agree with you more that the visual experience of the Talmud, the visual experience of the Bible is a whole different layer. And I will just end with one kvetch. For those of you who know my background, I grew up in the Haredi community. I grew up ultra-Orthodox in the Satmar community, and I left the Satmar community, but I'm still Orthodox, but I identify, well, frankly, I identify as Modern Hasidish, but we can get into the details between Modern Hasidish and Modern Orthodox. But my biggest disappointment is that I was looking forward to a community that utilizes the arts to appreciate our Judaism. And I really urge you to read the piece that I wrote for the accompanies our conversation, because as I said, most of you who have seen the Book of Mormon have left thinking, what a crass, what a, you know, pushing boundary piece of art that is. It's not. It's not. And I think that's what attracts me about modern Orthodoxy, is that you try to find the holiness and the divinity in everything, because ta chazi, when you visualize, things come forth that otherwise you have not seen. And for myself, for someone who has come to this late, there's all of a sudden this whole another layer of commentary that I wish I had the funds to publish, and I would publish a Siddur with art, 5 books of the Bible with art, and it would be incredible. All of them, Lucian Freud, Frida Kahlo, they're all Gedolei Hador in terms of their understanding the inner lives, and to tap into that and connect it with our encounter with the divinity, it's just a whole different experience. I feel Frida Kahlo has made me a better Jew. Lucian Freud has made me a better Jew. Jackson Pollock has made me a better Jew. All of them. I'm blanking now the name of the fashion designer, Alexander.
McQueen. I love him. Yes,
Alexander McQueen.
Brilliant.
What's clothing?
That's godless, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about last week's 2 weeks parsha, when the Kohen puts on the clothing lekavod u'letiferet, and then McQueen forces you to think what's clothing and where does clothing belong, and how does it fit in, and all that. Every artist in the world who does good art has an area in the Torah that's theirs that only they can illuminate.
So I want to go on one thing. First of all, I want to say I am not only, I'm very interested in the fact that, and I get that from my sister, we come from the Lavush, so I'm not putting down Mrs. Don't get me wrong. I'm an artist. I know, but I'm explaining to be an artist, you have to dream out loud. Right. The one thing I would say is,
one second, Tobi, 1 second, Robbie, just, you know, the coincidence, you ready for this? Today is the Lavush's yard site. So as it happens,
my sister usually tells me all this. She's on here. She usually lets me know a day before. Well, I want to say in his memory, on my mother's tombstone and on my grandmother's tombstone, it says that, and my children and my wife know that's what I want on my tombstone. But what I love is, and I by the way, I love Frida Kahlo, I love Lucian Freud, but I just want to say something because I'm always nervous, and the same thing with Rembrandt. I love that you stuck Pollock in there, but I always laugh, and I'm going to give everyone a present here who's here today. When you look at a Daf Gemara, think about a Jackson. Think about a Mark Rothko, because Mark Rothko, I think I can't get higher than him. I think there are many great artists, but what I love about him is there's so much room left for the interpretation. And if you look at his image, I've told this for years, it looks like a Daf Gemara because you have the central image and the sides. And I'm very interested in art, whether it's figurative or abstract. By the way, I don't know, and I don't care if it's photography, I don't care if it's sculpture, I don't care what it is, but it has to let room for the viewer to dream. I love talking to Rabbi Berman. We'll talk about, he'll go to a museum in a different city and he'll say, what do you think of that? And I say, just stand there and look at the image. I believe the image talks back to you. And if you look at somebody like Joseph Albers and his color theory, what happens to things changing? And I think in art and in religion, you have to be open to let the Daf Yomi or the Gemara or the Parsha or the Haftorah speak back to you a second time and a third time. And I believe great art does that. I did a shul in Milwaukee and I did a series of paintings around the space, and somebody interviewed me for that. And they said, why did you want to have so many different images? I said, sometimes you come into a shul and you want to think about birth. And one time you come into a shul, you want to think about marriage. One time you come into shul, you want to think about the people you lost. I think every experience should have multiple entranceways. And I agree with you. I'd love to see Urim and Machzorim, everything have a visual component, but it's not about illustration. That to me was the big thing. I spoke with Rabbi Hara Person when she commissioned me to do the piece. I said, there are two things. One is, I want to be the only artist, because if I'm going to do the whole Haggadah, I want to be the one to go through it. I don't want to say, I want to do Yetzias Mitzrayim, I want to do this. I want to have a visual component. The second thing I said is, don't crop my work. My work is the work. If you don't want it, don't use it.
Right.
Don't change the image, because it would be like cutting off a part of a shear that you give. And I think that's very important. So I love that you pick such diverse artists. That to me made my day.
Thank you. But Tobi, I know we have questions. I mean, definitely minutes of questions, but I just figured you out completely. I got your 23andMe. Your mind will be blown. Do you know what the name of the Levush's books are?
Yes, Felice gave it to me. Yeah.
Yes, I put it in the chart. One book is Levush Malchut. One book is Levush Tchelet. One book is Levush Argaman. It's all about color based on this verse, because it says in the Megillah Mordechai, and his name was Mordechai, and he kind of connected to this pasuk. It's genetic, Tobi, right? Your ancestor was books that were all about color. It's just incredible. By the way,
Ysoscher,
I just realized that. Wow.
I never take credit for my gifts. I believe it's straight from God. I believe
it's genetic. 23andMe for free. I gave it to you for free, Tobi.
You're exotic, but I have a wife and a sister who have told me this for years. But let me just say one thing. I
thought I discovered it.
Well, you discovered it your own way. You discovered it a new way today. But I just want to say something, Ysoscher. I will never forget when I was a little boy. My sister knows it because she was there, and my wife has heard it. We lived in Washington Heights on Cabrini Boulevard, and I was 6 years old. I would sit on my radiator and look at the bricks across the street from me, and I'd sit there for ages. And my mother said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I love the way the light changes on the bricks." And she said to me, "What do you mean?" And I'd say, "Look at it. The bricks. If you go on Cabrini Boulevard, there were bricks that were yellowy, reddish, and depending on what time of the day it was, because of the lime that was in between the bricks, the color would change amazingly." And I knew at a very young age that color to me was everything. And I believe that, when people say to me, you're observant, how did you relate to it? My mom always would say, "That's great." I don't even know if she understood what I was looking at, but she never said to me, "You're wasting your time." She would say, "No, that's very nice." And if you look at any color, I always talk about James Turrell, who's good, but I think Robert Irwin, they're a whole group of color light artists, and the light changes just on the angle that you're in. And that to me is Kedusha,
Yep.
that it's how you interpret.
Are there any questions, Devere?
Yes, so Yona Simcha Chaim is curious about the idea of barrenness. And you described just at the end of the process of what's left and what's kind of in that negative space. And if there's a curiosity of opening up about that idea that you were tapping into.
Tobi, that's for you.
That's for me. I would love to hear what you have to say, but I will tell you what I have to say. Many, many years ago, somebody asked me to do, I create memorial objects, and somebody asked me to do a piece for women who had miscarriages. And I made a very small vessel because I believe when something about barrenness and about trees that lose all their leaves, and God forbid when a woman loses a child before the child is born, but that there's something there. I think it's important to take every experience. Don't get me wrong, I'm not Pollyanna. I know horror is horror, and when you see something, without anything, in fact, it makes me think of a story when my wife and I were dating, and we went through Central Park one day, and it was nighttime, and there were empty trees, and she said, "Oh, this is so sad," and I'd say, "No, this is gorgeous. You see all the bones of the tree. It's so beautiful. They're connecting with God." So I feel I don't ever think there's something beautiful in barrenness, but I think of the possibilities, and I think of what can happen. So that last image that I showed was really, it's like The Giving Tree. It's one of my favorite children's books, that, this beautiful story about a tree, and then at the end there's a stump and you sit on there, and I can't remember his name. I'm bad with names, but the guy who did The Giving Tree, it's a great book. Somebody hopefully will put in the name, but it was, you give and give and give, and then there's very little left to give. And I feel that way when these plants and these trees have given everything and there's nothing left. There's something still beautiful in that. If you ever look at the dance of Martha Graham, and as she was older, I loved watching the way her body moved. It was a very different body than a young person. So that's really what it was about to me. I wanted to end with, when you give so much and there's still something beautiful there. Also, Nessa always tells me, I love looking at older people, and I look at Giacometti, and there's a very famous Giacometti quote that Giacometti said, "What's left, what I take away from the sculpture is even more important than what's left in the sculpture." And I felt that, and Ysoscher, I'm happy you like that animal in the background, because you still see it's an animal, but there are no obvious, you can't tell if it's a cow or a lamb or a goat. I wanted it to be the essence of that. And the same was with those two trees that were intermingled at the end.
Right. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, and I want to be sensitive to time. So just 30 seconds, I want to react to what you said, since we brought up our dating experiences. So when my wife and I were dating, Sherry and I were dating, we loved to go watch dance. I'm a big dance person. And I think that part of the reason, again, for me, as a yeshiva bacher, it all connects ultimately back to my avodat Hashem. And when I see a dance, dance has two pieces mostly, right? Mostly it's kind of the movement of the body, but also the way the dancers use the space and the way they fill space. And space looks different each time when you see a different dance. And the same space all of a sudden looks very differently. And it reminded me of a friend of mine who said that people misconstrue the way tefillah works, the way prayer works. We normally look at a siddur and we see spaces filled by words, and we focus on the words. And he said, actually, it's the opposite. The words in the prayer book are there to frame the spaces between the prayer words. And that's where real prayer happens. Every time I go to a dance, all I can think of is, look, space can be multiple things and multiple interpretations. So yeah, there's a lot out there for us to still learn and understand better. And once again, I think I should wrap up my en hapticha. Rabbi Kahn, Rani, and Karen, and Devere, what you guys are doing are really building Migdashay Ma'at. really small mini Beis Hamikdashes. Today we have got 50 people come to a mini Beis Hamikdash for a few days to hear what it is that we're here for in this world and to encounter divinity, to encounter holiness. So really thank you, Devir, for the shidduch. It was a great shidduch, and I suspect that the relationship between Tobi and me will continue beyond this experience. And really, yashakach for all of you who came out today to engage and be involved with this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Devir. You did a great job. Ysoscher, I loved every minute. I want to throw in one thing since you said about dance. Before I got into the nature, I spent years doing a show that's now also in Washington at Wesley Seminary. It's a Christian seminary of images of dancers from the age of 30 to 70 and how they move in space and looking at the negative space. I love what you said.
Negative space.
There's so many great dance companies that really show the glory of God's creation of humanity. I think of Pina Bausch. You know, Ness and I went to your early.
A friend of ours is a Bausch performer.
I just like, oh my God. And so I did over 150 images of dancers moving in space, but really about that moment in time rather than exactly what you said, fixing on how they move in the negative and positive space. Thank every person for coming here. I know so many of you here. I am touched beyond belief how many of you I know well. It means that people from LA, from when I teach in Orange County are there, and from my artist Beit Midrash, and from the JCC and Tenafly, my sister in Israel, my Rebbe, my amazing wife and children. As an artist who cares so much about Kedusha and holiness, this is the first time I've been on a panel like this, and I loved every second of it. Ysoscher, thank you very much. And Devir for making the shidduch. I really thank you. And for all the people of the Artist Jewish Art Salon, Yona Verver, what you created, and seeing so many people from that organization too, and even people from SVA. I can't believe you guys showed up. So thank you. I really, really appreciate it.
Kol tov, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye.